Hello, hello, hello. Replaced one from the prior video. Fun fact, before I do any of these, whenever I start the recording, I have to do a noise reduction track where I record myself like squeaking in my chair and moving around, maybe sometimes doing a little cough noise or something of that nature. Lots of fun. Just to make sure that I can get rid of all those fun little noises afterwards. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it becomes a big mess, but not too often. Alright. Welcome back to, almost said Spooktober. Plaguetober, yes, that's what it is, probably. Plaguetober 2019, the first time I did any of this. For any of this, you people first joining us for some bizarre reason. This October I'm going through, and rather than doing what they call Inktober, which typically is try to draw a drawing every single day, which causes you to hate your own life, I decided not to do that, and instead decided to do a little venture on YouTube this time around. And the goal was get people to submit their local myths and legends of monsters, and I will turn them into monster ladies, because why not? That makes lots of money, doesn't it? No? It doesn't? News to me. So that's what I've been up to. This is the very last one in that particular series. It started with the Wampus, which is a legend of sort of our region, but more of the Americas. I tried to make sure that most of these were not within the United States, because most of my listening base is based in the Americas, of course, United States specifically. I actually have a lot of international listeners that I was not aware of. And YouTube allows you to look at such things, like where people are listening from, that sort of thing. And a lot of people not from the United States, actually. Typically, it's more United States, Australia, Germany, also, and like Mexico and like the British Isles, things of that nature. Typically, that's what it is. But every so often, you'll have some people pop up in South Africa and stuff like that, which is cool. I always like seeing stuff like that. Wonder what's going on in your neck of the woods. What is going on in your neck of the woods? Like, tell me, if you're from Antarctica, or whatever you're from, random person living in Antarctica, first off, be prepared for the menace of the Thing, which I'm sure that you're keenly aware of. But also, what are you up to? What's going on down there? Why are you watching YouTube videos, suspicious YouTube videos of monster girls? What's going on? Anyways, I'll give some history about the Coqui and whatnot. But first, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned this one probably has the most of me going through random drafts out of all of them. I think that's pretty. Yeah, it's easy to say that, because this is one of those days where I had a general idea, and I felt like I was working for a breakthrough moment. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk about initially. Often is the case, like every artist has their own little problems and hang-ups and things that they lean into too much and things of that nature. With me, it's, unless I'm working off of a reference of some sort. In this case, I was not. I was just doing what I always do and just doing random guesswork. I do doing a lot of guesswork, and as a result, I come up with a lot of form issues where I'm trying to show off too much of the character, and as a result, I'm like contorting them in weird ways and trying to position them awkwardly. And here, I'm just not happy at all with the model that I'm constructing, and I'm just going back over it over and over and over again. And I do this, I think even now I've done it like 10 times over the course of this one video. And here I'm just redrawing it over and over and over. Because the goal of this sort of thing is, one, in looking up, like, what other frog girls are there? Like, if I'm doing that. Because the Coqui is a frog. It's a very small frog native to, most well known as being a Puerto Rican thing. And I'll talk about more of that later. But I was thinking, well, what do we have evidence of? And then I realized, well, yeah, my hero definitely has, what's her face? Can't remember what her name is. She's everyone's favorite, though, because she's a little cutie pie. And I thought, wow, that design really knocked that one out of the park, didn't it? I really don't have anything left to do. So that sort of was in the back of my head the entire time, trying not to design something that was very similar to that. But this was my original idea. Like, before I even started drawing, I had this idea of little frog girl holding a leaf above her head, trying to stay free of the rain. And during the course of drawing, I sort of veered away from that because I was just trying to come up with a design. And in the course of doing this, I was also wondering, well, if it's a frog girl, then also she needs to have a frog shape. And something that I've been thinking about recently is the fact that a lot of my models are too rigid. That is, a lot of my hands and arms and legs and things all look pretty much the same. And they don't really communicate like life. Like, I need to draw them less as objects and more as though they're fluid, more cartoon-like shapes. I've been trying to get away from... that pauses me just like sitting there looking at it for a long time going, not this, not this. And I did that for probably a good 5 minutes, just sitting there just looking at it. Till eventually it's like, alright, I'm going to be super aggressive. And I wanted to point this out. This is basically the part where I sort of broke myself. Like, I'm always looking for that weird breakthrough moment whenever I'm drawing, of where... In the process of drawing, I'm always doing the same thing, and it's hard to communicate this correctly. But I always have this problem of sort of fighting my brain's natural tendency to want to do things. Like, even if it's not art-related, everyone has little things about themselves that you feel like, I'm always doing this, or I always gravitate towards this one thing. I'm always... Like, the brain is about programming yourself. Like, if you're trying to change yourself as a person, and you find yourself leaning back into old behaviors and attitudes and things, that is because your brain is a physical mechanism, and your brain works the same way that anything else is. Like, if you're working out, if you decide, I'm going to get real muscular, you don't just lift weights and suddenly you're muscular, right? You have to build up to it. And that takes months and months of time, because you are consistently working at, like, permanently changing your body in a way that is... Here, I'm playing with the idea perspective, I decided against it. You're trying to permanently change your body, and that just takes a very long time, because your body is a device. Every component of you, even down to your own mind, is part of a working mechanism, a physical means of interaction. And with drawing, you can't see any of that occurring because it's all mental, but it's sort of the same thing, where I'm constantly trying to not only just draw something, but find that component of, I don't like this one thing, and just destroy it. And me sitting there looking at it for a long time is just me trying to obliterate that component of myself. And I keep working back over and destroying my old drafts over and over and over again, because I was trying to get to this moment. And this is the sort of when the final draft starts kicking in, and I suddenly start feeling it. And I say, okay, this, whatever my brain just did, I'm going to lock into that and go with that. And it pays off, eventually. Just the process of... Drawing is not only a process of just doing the mechanics of it, but especially in the drafting process, which you could say is the most challenging in a way. Like, if you're using reference and you already have the image, and you know, well, it needs to look like this. I like what I see here, so obviously I'm going to use this. Then there's slightly less work in a way, although you're still working as an artist, so you have to make choices on what to distort, what to affect in terms of taking it out of reality to make it more real, in that sense. In other words, as an artist, you have the ability to be able to use art in a way that cannot be reflected in photography or real life. You can exaggerate things that otherwise would not be exaggerated, and that exaggeration is what ends up making it more real as a result. So you have to do all that. But if you're doing it freeform, like I do, then it's just a big pain in the ass, and you're constantly having to question what is real and what becomes more real and what is most effective to the goals of what you're trying to do, and just draft stage, both the most fun part of the drawing and by far the biggest hell. But anyways, it is done. From this point forward, I decided, all right, this is what I want finally, and at that point forward, I'm just doing primary over primary, trying to shore up the general image. And with all my other girls that I've done this month, I did look at the local culture, local people, things of that nature, and specifically looking up images, Puerto Rico girls and whatnot. I realized a few people have been complaining. A lot of your images have been really brown lately, and I realized I like brown. I really like brown. And that's the reason why they've been brown. It's because I just like that color. Also, if you're basing things off, if you're making monster women, and they're usually going to be based off some sort of monster of some sort, there's a lot of brown dark elements in that, especially if they're based off real life animals, like an owl, for example, or say a snake. Snakes will be green or brown usually. There's not too much variation. There can be really colorful ones, but especially if you're basing it off something that isn't particular to, ooh, I want a colorful snake, and it's just something that's indigenous to an area, it's probably going to be green or brown. And in that case, it sort of was. Talking about the Brazilian monster. With this one in particular, I guess I'll get into that. The Coqui is a very, very tiny little frog. And it has this... I looked at videos of it actually doing this little chirp. And it's supposedly called a Coqui because of the noise that it makes. I don't know if the word itself actually means anything or not. But it could just be a case of it being an onomatopoeia, I think is the word. I can't remember quite. But it's a very relaxing noise, and I imagine it's... A lot of people say they hate crickets, for example. I'm using an American example, United States example. By the way, if you don't live within the Americas, or actually if you live within the United States, a lot of people, obviously, that live in, say, South America, for example, or even the Caribbean, will get upset at Americans referring to themselves as being Americans, but we do it because United States of America is just part of the name. We don't even really think about it. But the insinuation is, oh, you're the only Americans. It's that sort of thing. So forgive me for that if you're one of those people that does get upset at that sort of thing, but it's completely innocuous. We don't mean anything by it. What was I even saying? Oh, an American example. A United Statesian example. That's why we don't... That's why we call ourselves Americans. So we don't have to refer to ourselves as United Statesians. A lot of people say they hate crickets, and I always love the sound of crickets. It's very relaxing to me. But I understand why. A lot of people get very, very irritated with the sound of this loud chirping creature that's in a wall somewhere, and it ensures that they can't get to sleep or something of the nature. Personally, I've always loved it. I remember going to school, elementary school, and because I was me, and because of my childhood, I had a habit of capturing animals like crickets or, snails, or even one time I scooped up a bunch of pond water just to see what was inside of it. And I started wondering, where are these mosquitoes coming from? Because I had it plastic wrapped. I had plastic wrap on the top of the jar. I was wondering, where are these mosquitoes coming from? How are they getting in there? Until my little baby brain finally put together, oh, there's mosquito larvae that are gestating inside of this thing. And that's one of my first experiences with science, is, oh, they don't just magically manifest out of thin air, right? But anyways, I took a bunch of crickets to school one time, and in the course of the teacher trying to teach, everyone was getting really annoyed at well, not everyone, but several people were getting annoyed at the loud crickets making such a horrible racket. And I was sitting there thinking, this is really relaxing to me. Like, this is some of the most relaxing. This is some of the most relaxing environment I've ever been inside of a classroom. Just these pleasant little crickets chirping the background while we're getting a lesson. This is really nice, but not for everyone. Caqui sort of, I guess, is the Puerto Rican example of that. You probably have crickets too, but you get what I'm saying. I say this because the Coqui is apparently, I read this anyways, the loudest amphibian on the planet. It's this very tiny frog, but it emits this massive, like Coqui noise whenever it's doing its mating call. And it's known, only the males make it, and supposedly the ka is the noise that they make to say, get away from here, other males. Like, this is my territory. And the qui is the sound that they make to attract females. I guess the females just really like that qui, that pleasant qui sound. I don't know what it is about it. I guess the ka does sound a little bit intimidating in tiny frog language. I can't really say. So a lot of this gets wrapped up also in, oddly enough, Puerto Rican politics and Puerto Rican just culture. And I'll reiterate the actual tale here. And it took me a while to figure this out. I can't actually find where this story came from exactly, but it seems to have been passed down for a very long time. The original people before Columbus came there and just fucked up everything because Columbus. The indigenous peoples were the Taino people, I think is how it's pronounced, Taino, and they migrated from the South Americas, I believe, into the Caribbeans, and they sort of populated all the islands there. And they're generally considered to be one group of people. And these days, of course, they're effectively extinct. There's some debate. Like, I even learned this back in college. We covered this a lot because of Columbus and American studies. But there's some debate about this. Some people will say, well, no, they're not extinct. We still exist. And, I'm a descendant of the Taino people. And some people are very proud of that. But in terms of culture and everything else, they're effectively extinct. Because if you don't know, what happened was whenever Columbus stumbled upon all this, of course, the gold trade was in big swing. They realized, oh, there's actually some resources here that we can exploit. So there was a lot of hand cutting off and child slavery and prostitution and just horrible, horrible things that there's no reason to get into. But the end result, of course, was effectively the extinction of the people there, both because of the persecution, but also because new people from a new land came in and brought diseases and stuff that to Europeans, Africans, Asians would be nothing. But because of the long-term isolation of being in the Americas, a lot of these things were so brand new to their ecology, I guess, that it just killed a huge percentage of them. So as a result, not only were they being persecuted into extinction, they were also being biologically driven into extinction. Because there was just plague upon plague that was happening as a result of this new group of people that were coming in and bringing all these things with them. So I talked about in prior videos how there's a lot of lost history and things that are they're just gone now. And that's really unfortunate. And that's just one of them. There's lots of things about the Americas that we just don't know anymore. And they're just gone. And we don't really have much of a way of rediscovering them. We can find information that sort of harkens back to it, but there were people just a few, I almost said years ago, but centuries. There were people a few centuries ago that could have given us so much information about this, and we just didn't use it at the time for obvious reasons, and now it's just gone. So, oh well. Sucks to be human. Sure does. Things that we do to ourselves. But I mention all that because supposedly this story goes back all the way prior to the colony efforts, the discovery by Columbus and whatnot. So I think that this story originates prior to that with the Taino people. And the story, there's actually several stories. One of them is that a god named Guahiona abducted all the women from the island, and I think they're referring to Puerto Rico there. Abducted all the women, leaving all the men to take care of the kids. And supposedly the kids make the same sound as the frogs, crying out "Mother, Mother" or "Toa, Toa," and as though imitating the frogs. And as a result, because of this, the children, the children of the women who were abducted, ended up turning into frogs themselves. And I've always liked sort of weird. I've always tried to emulate that with some of my little storytelling things. The sort of weird little things that don't really make any sense, like logically. There's something that we've gotten away with in the Western world as far as storytelling, where things like that, like the children cried out "Mother, Mother" for so long that they transformed themselves into frogs, and it reflects the cries of the frogs themselves and the local environment, things like that. You don't really see storytelling like that anymore. There has to be a logical reason to everything. So I've always found stories like that to be really interesting. But that's one story. The other is whenever the original inhabitants, the Taino people, came upon Puerto Rico, or wherever the story originated from, there was a chief's son that was called Caqui. And she apparently fell in love with him. This goddess fell in love with him, who's not named, I believe. And they planned to meet, but then an evil deity of like just chaos called Jurakan showed up and prevented them from meeting one another. And this like blackened the skies, and it seems to be almost like they're talking about a storm or a hurricane or something, I imagine. Quiet phone. And the goddess managed to find him to try to protect him. Well, she was trying... Excuse me, I misspoke. She was trying to find him to be able to protect him, but this Jurakan showed up and abducted the man before she could get to him. And as a result, they never actually found one another again. So the meeting that they had planned never occurred. So as a result, she supposedly created the frogs, and they would call out his name for the rest of time, calling out Caqui, Caqui. And that's what the birth of that species of frog happens to be. There's actually two different species that are known for doing this Caqui sound. One is like the common Caqui, and the other one is like the upland Caqui. I think it's also known as the Puerto Rican robber frog. And I couldn't figure out why it's called the robber frog, but I just thought that was funny. And there's a lot of species of this. I think it was something like above 15. I think it was like 16 or 17. But a good portion of them, like 14 or 13, are localized mostly in the El Yunque National Forest, which is on the east coast of Puerto Rico. And I know that because, you see, I drew these little, I haven't got to the color yet, but I drew these little flowers on the sides. I did that because I was like, I want some color in this image. It can't all just be browns and greens. I'm going to throw some flora in here too. So I went and looked up, like, what's local to Puerto Rico that looks cool? What can I throw in here? And I found out there were some trees that had been imported, apparently, from Madagascar at some point. I didn't know the story about that. And by the way, here, I finished this, and then I started looking at other pictures. And I thought, I really don't like the fact that everything blends together, because I had this tendency to get overly detailed. And I start trying to draw every single strand of hair, and I sort of... It ends up flattening the image because I'm turning everything into sort of this blob of lines. So I decided I'm going to go back through and do like a tertiary pass on my line work, and just sort of bring out the areas that I think are most important, and try to create more form within my shapes. Which a lot of that will be handled in color, but I decided to just go through and do it this way too. So that's what I'm doing. Because I wanted to make sure, since this is my last one, I wanted to make sure that it was actually a good drawing and not some of my standard. I'm going to poop this out in a few seconds. But in the course of looking for these pretty things to incorporate, I happened upon the flamboya tree, which obviously flamboyant. It's this red blossom tree, very pretty, that was imported apparently to Puerto Rico. And I looked up and I thought, where are these trees? Do these occur in the rainforest? Then I found out, no, they are mostly apparently localized within sort of the middle portion of the country, like the southern middle, I believe. That's all of the examples I could find from it anyways. But then I thought, I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna do it anyways, because I'm an asshole. So I did it anyways. Thought, you know what? This tree grows in the rainforest now. That makes no sense. Apparently it deals a little bit better in slightly drier climates, or else it might get washed out. I don't know. Might rot its roots. I don't know. I don't care. You get to be a pretty jungle tree now. So... things that don't occur in photographs that are all about art. Sometimes you just throw it in there for the hell of it. And that's what I did. So yeah, the frog girl is in the El Yunque National Forest, which is over on the east coast of the country. Over near Rio Grande. I looked up images of what that forest looked like, and I knew I wasn't going to, because in this series I've been focusing more on not trying to come to a resolution of how to do backgrounds without actually drawing them in the same way that I draw my foregrounds. And my prior examples had been like doing this sort of Winnie the Pooh-esque thing where I'm just doing some very loose line work and then doing some color, some really low saturation color. But in this one, I knew since I was going to go with these bright red flowers, and I didn't want it to be completely devoid of life around her, and also because I knew I was going to draw in rain later, which requires you to not have a white background necessarily. It has to be at least a little bit dark. I knew I'm going to have to almost completely color this in. So that was my goal for the background. Haven't gotten to it yet. But that was my ultimate goal, is to try to create that form and everything, etc. You get the idea. But I was looking at images of the rainforest, and I didn't have to do too much detail work in terms of drawing it, but I did want it to be at least somewhat accurate. So a lot of those insinuations of trees in the background and whatnot, and even the leaves, are things that I saw within images of the park. So I don't know what trees they are specifically, but just in this light bout of research that I did for this video, that's what I was attempting to emulate, if you're wondering. So hope someone out there appreciates that. If no one does, then no one does. The frog itself, I actually started researching this too, because I got interested. The Taino people also apparently greatly revered this frog. Apparently it's well known for being part of a Puerto Rican culture now. I think there's a couple of sayings like like the Coqui, I also am from here. Because the Spanish word for, like, present or here is aquí. I'm vaguely remembering some very old Spanish courses, so you'll have to forgive me. I do not speak Spanish. But it's something of that nature. Like, soy. No, I'm not even going to try that. I'm not even going to try. Um, but yeah, I am from here. I am also, like the Caqui, I'm also from here. That's one saying, and the other is, um, I'm not loud, I'm just Puerto Rican, or it's something of that nature. Because it's I'm. It's like this parallel of Puerto Ricans considering themselves like they're a small country, and supposedly a lot of them are short. Or apparently, that's what I read online. I don't know if that's true or not. But they consider themselves to also be very loud and boisterous. So the idea is that this frog is sort of paralleling their own existence, that they are small but loud, and they show great enthusiasm with existing and being who they are. That's that sort of thing. So the Coqui sort of tied up within their own sort of national identity in some respects. But that was also apparently true with the Taino people before the colonization stuff started. Because researchers have gone into like local caves, which apparently were considered to be culturally significant in some way, and it's assumed to have been some sort of religious thing. But they found like a petroglyphs, um, like like when you carve out an image of something using a tool into solid rock, that sort of thing. And a lot of those do depict a lot of their local society and culture and whatnot. And since we can't ask them, since they don't exist anymore, and a lot of those did depict this same frog. And I think even that's where this legend comes from, supposedly. It's something that existed in some form or another before anyone got there. So supposedly, I mean, that's where it came from. This local infatuation with this little frog. And I imagine, considering it's so loud and so prevalent, that it sort of has to become part of your local culture. I mean, it's probably one of those things. So I find it's interesting that this little creature has persisted, not only in terms of, like, I'm sure that locals heard about it and it sort of evolved over time, but it's almost like it's being rediscovered by the same people. And it doesn't matter if the local people that were indigenous have been completely wiped out since then. Uh, it's almost like people are people no matter who they are, and the fact that this one little bitty tradition is still being carried and emulated and being created independently is evidence that the same sort of spirit still exists within people no matter who they happen to be. That sort of thing. And a lot of these carvings in the wall, the frogs usually have some sort of feminine connotation, like they may have been insinuated to be associated with fertility and that sort of thing. And considering that the cry is from it is indeed a mating call of the male Coqui, then you could probably read into that as well. Like there's probably a reason why all these stories involve some parallel of romance or unrequited love or people having their children taken from them and things of that nature. Like there's always some sort of connotation of the frog being associated with womanhood or romance or seeking out love and things of that nature. So I would not say that this frog girl's name is Coqui, since apparently that was the name of her male love interest. But I would say probably this one of many of the Coqui frog people, if I'm making up lore here. I don't know what her name is. I almost... No, I'm not going to even try to name her. Not on the fly. Here drawing those flowers. Um, but yeah, if there was a race of frog people that existed because of this goddess, then she would be one of their ancestors, I guess. That's probably my rationale for it. So there you go. That's good enough. Here we're starting on that background, trying to work this out. It was kind of fun trying to work up from this. It's kind of challenging too. Because before here I am like trying to figure this out. You notice I didn't color in like the sides of the branches and whatnot, which that's a problem because I can do that with one section, but the minute that I start trying to do this, like create more of a background that actually has color, it has backing to it, then it creates more of an issue. So I end up having to try to find solutions for this by intentionally avoiding, like zoning out everything that's around these other color zones, and then putting more like multiply layers on top of it to try to unify everything together. I come up with several different solutions. A lot of them involve layer work, so it was pretty fun. It gets more interesting once I start doing this and start unifying the colors, and especially whenever I start incorporating the rain into the image. That's probably the most fun part of doing the color work. Is doing all the rain and then finally seeing it come together in a way that was actually pleasing. Because prior to this, like even now, it's still, it's pretty flat. It just exists. It's fine. I could stop here if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. And here I briefly thought, this yellow, this sort of sunset look, does look nice, but it's not going to really look that way exactly whenever it's raining. And I can't change the picture because she's holding the leaf above her head. That was my entire idea for this image. So even though it wouldn't make sense that she was just holding it above her head during like sundown, so I decided, alright, I'll just keep going with my rain idea. May as well. I started on this journey, may as well finish it. Also, in the course of my research, I started looking up why exactly is the Coqui associated with Puerto Rican, like, people? Like, is there, like, something about this that I don't know that isn't obvious? And I didn't really find many hard answers to that. But it did get me down the rabbit hole of Puerto Rican independence. And if you're, like, Puerto Rican and you're listening to this for some reason, a lot of Americans, United Statesians, don't really know that much about Puerto Rico, what's going on down there. So I went back and sort of revisited. I actually do know a little bit about the area just because of, one, college research, and also as far back as elementary school. I did a report on Haiti at the time because of the earthquakes that were happening, earthquake-based tragedies that were happening during the early 90s. I can't remember what year that was, but it's quite a far way back. So I do have some sort of basis in it. Like, I'm sort of used to reading about it. But a lot of the independence movement, I couldn't really find too many hard answers on this. Because I was wondering, why exactly is that a controversy? How come they aren't a state? And more importantly, if they've chosen not to be a state, is there some reason why they would also not want to be independent anymore? Like, I was looking into that. And, of course, because the United States was an evil fuck back in the 1900s, and it still is in slightly different ways, I imagine. But back in, like, the early 1900s, I think as a result of the Spanish-American War, actually, they laid claim to Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico obviously wanted to be free, because they didn't want to be under the rule of a foreign body, especially one as close as the United States was. Especially as evil as the United States was back during those days. Because it was still... Words cannot describe how, like, if you read stuff about what the United States was doing during that era, it was rough. Those were some rough times internationally. And they did not seem to care. But that's a story for another time. But there's a lot of, like, assassinations and upheaval and, like, mass shootings and things like that were going on during that era. And then around sort of the 50s to 60s, it sort of, for some reason, died down in a way that I couldn't really... Like, I didn't spend too much time researching this, but it sort of died down for whatever reason. And during the... Like, up until, like, the 80s and the 90s, there were still things happening. But for the most part, people seem to sort of just ease into this idea of just being a territory and just accepting that for whatever reason. But the nationalists still exist, and this is the thing that I actually found interesting about it. They've been offered like statehood several times, and usually it's Republicans that oppose it because Puerto Rico leans heavily Democrat, I think. So they have faced some opposition within like the House and Senate and whatnot. But apparently, like, the thing I was mainly concerned about was the Puerto Ricans themselves and what their opinion on the matter was. And from what I can gather, some people are in favor of them becoming a state because it would afford them some things, like being able to vote, for one, be nice. Being, like, weird little things like being able to declare bankruptcy if you are a, like, government institution on the island. It's some weird thing like that. And there's a few other things, like obvious things. But I couldn't really find any information on why exactly they would not want to be, other than there is some insinuation that if they were to do so, they would lose their, like, cultural significance, like they would become whitewashed. Like, this time I am using it in terms of like a race thing, but they, like, there's a fear that they would become whitewashed and become like too Americanized, I guess. But also apparently they would have the individual, like, people would see increased tax rates. And that's the other main thing that I could find. So that seems to be mainly the issues, is there's some quibbling over, like, financing and the economic stability of the area that gets into things that I don't understand. And if you look down in the comment section of this video, maybe someone will bring it up, but I doubt it. And even if they do, that's probably going to be the tip of the iceberg, and I don't imagine anyone's going to do a good job of summarizing it there, nor should they. They should focus instead on frog tits. Maybe not. But that aside, I think the more important thing is the fact that they're trying to preserve their cultural identity, which I can definitely appreciate. In terms of all of the little monster women that we've done and this month, like I've stated in the prior video, the main reason why I wanted you guys to do this, to sort of find your own local legends and things of that nature, was to come to a better understanding of, like, your own, like, self-identity, your own local culture, what things mean to you personally. Because in terms of drawing and writing and things like that, a lot of it is just self-identity and self-exploration. Because in just existing as people and being who we are, in this life, the only thing that we're really going to get is what our personal experience happens to be and what value that we can find in the world around us. So a lot of life is just that. It's just coming up with, this is important to me, this is who I am. And for some people, that's going to be, like, cultural based. It's going to be associated more with the people around them and their own nation and things like that. I'm personally not that way. I'm more focused inward, and I don't really care too much about people. I love drawing little leaf shiny things like that. It's fun. Sorry, that distracted me. But I'm more focused towards myself and not necessarily incorporating things from a local culture or anything like that. But I think it is important to be able to find things about things that define you that are not associated with you specifically. And with Americans specifically, we don't really get much of that because the things that we used to have, like from this area, that were unique to the landscape, a lot of the times have been completely lost now. For obvious reasons. Like, we rendered them extinct, our ancestors did. And now it's just gone. Whereas if you're like European, then obviously your region has just shit tons of history. And it's all localized, and a lot of... This is also fun, drawing little drippies. That's fun. And, you have a lot to sort of pick from and be able to look at and say, this is me. Like, this is... It's like looking back and looking at your own heritage, like who your grandfather's grandfather was, and things like that. Which I did somewhat recently, this past year and a half. I went back and looked at who all my ancestors were, and it took a long time to find out because the census didn't really kick in until the middle of the 1800s, and especially was complicated by the Civil War that happened here. So as a result, there's a lot of missing information, so a lot of people's historical records just stop there. But once you actually break through that barrier and start going further back, then it becomes a little bit easier. And I managed to track my mother's side back to, like, France. They were apparently Calvinists that escaped France during that time. And, which their side of the family is not happy about. Despite being French, they detest the French for whatever their reasons, which I found funny when I found that out. But my other side, my father's side, apparently were the original settlers for Jamestown. And they came from Scotland. And that was a result of James? I can't remember who the king was. But he was he basically helped unify the United Kingdom. I forget what the history is. But there's a reason why Scottish people became associated with the colonial people that were coming over during that time frame. So he was one of them. And he was like it was some crazy numbers, like John the 16th. And I kept looking, it's like, they were all named John? That's crazy. But anyways, it's just fun little things like that. I just want you to be able to have a greater appreciation for being able to discover more about who you are because of where you come from and what the area says about yourself. You know, a lot of the times, local culture, nations, geography, whatever, says nothing about who you are as a person, but you still live there, and it's still a part of who you are. And more importantly, it helps to unify people as a whole and helps you to understand the people around you whenever, like the Coqui frog, for example, it was rediscovered in its own way. Like, people keep rediscovering the same traits because we're all human and we all have similar thoughts, similar goals, ambitions, and whatnot. And that's one thing that does keep us united, is the fact that we have the same loves, the same hopes, the same aspirations, the same thoughts, the same ideas. And being able to come up with something like Monster Women from local folk tales or whatever is just one of those little minor things that helps to bring people together. So, that's also, you can probably imagine yourself fucking them if you're into that sort of thing. So, a little something for everyone. You know, if you're a monster yourself, then there you go. Alright, so, that's it for this particular month. Thank you for joining me on this adventure through Plaguetober. Maybe I'll do something like this again next year. I don't know. It wasn't too bad this year. I did this mainly because I didn't want to kill myself drawing anything, so it's been sort of relaxing, but also the fact that I was trying to do so much during one month also sort of created a little bit of an issue for me as far as time getting goes, but it wasn't too bad. So, tell me what you guys thought of this little adventure that we did this month, and I'll maybe look forward to doing it again next year. And tell me what you think of this drawing. I think this is probably the best out of the ones that I did this particular month. They were all experiments. I would not say that any of them are failures, because all of them are me attempting new things and seeing what the results are. And really, that's more what this is all about, is just trying to gain experience through failing. And that's probably more important than anything else. So, hope you guys enjoy failing on your fronts, because that's how you grow as a person. Alright, so, see you guys next video. So long.